First, joining us from Capitol Hill is Congressman Johnny Olszewski, a Democrat of Maryland. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Sure thing. Good morning, Jamie.
Wanted to start with something you posted yesterday on X. Just after the Senate passed the bill, you said, "People will suffer. I stand ready to defeat this bill as it heads back to the House for a vote." Explain what you and other Democrats can do to defeat the bill.
Well, people will suffer if this bill passes, and that's why Democrats are united in opposing this bill, and Democrats are united in asking the question. The question we should all be asking is why anyone would vote for this legislation. It's legislation that represents the largest cut to health care for Americans. 16 million Americans will lose their health coverage under this, and costs will go up for those who manage to keep their health care. We're going to see millions of families, including 20,000 families in my district, lose food benefits, families who are struggling to keep food on the table. And for what? In the process, we're going to line the pockets of the ultra wealthy. Billionaires are going to see massive tax cuts. Working families are going to see little to no relief. The poorest of our families are going to see tax increases. They're going to pay more. And we're going to balloon this deficit by up to $4 trillion. I think what we saw in the Senate with the action just yesterday, that there was a carve out on just the SNAP and work provisions for SNAP, as well as state share, that ended up disproportionately benefiting two states, the Murkowski carve out for Alaska and Hawaii. And if this bill is so bad, we have to ask ourselves, why was there a carve out for just a few states? So we know this is a problem. Republicans know this bill is a problem. That's why they're pushing it through, again, for an artificial timeline. But again, we stand united to defeat this legislation, and we're encouraging Americans to lift their voices so that those Republicans who are concerned about the deficit, concerned about rural hospitals closing, that they lift their voices and also join us in opposing this measure today.
When the bill passes, how and when do you expect Americans to first feel the impact, and what could the long-term impact be?
You know, I think the concern with this is when hospitals close, it's not like a switch. So rural hospitals will close, I think, pretty quickly as this bill takes effect. And we know how hard it is to get hospitals open. We can't flip a switch and reopen them. We know that states are already struggling. In my home state of Maryland, my governor just announced hiring freezes across all of government to save $120 million. So our state cannot bear the burden of these SNAP cuts, for example. And I was just in a library in Baltimore County where we were doing a summer meal program, building on the work I did as Baltimore County executive, where we have universal meals for breakfast and lunch during the school year. We expanded summer SNAP. But those programs are all at risk because SNAP really was the undergirding. It was the foundation of all the work that we did. And so we will see hospitals close, I think, quickly within a year or two of this legislation passing. We will immediately start seeing food programs that are feeding hungry kids go away. And we will see people lose their health care. We will see premiums go up with the next open enrollment cycle by up to thousands of dollars. And just on the food point, you know, 80% of all SNAP recipients are either a child, a senior, a disabled person, or a veteran. So I would encourage my Republican colleagues to let that sink in. Let's think about who we are taking these benefits from. And again, all to the benefit of the ultra wealthy in this country while ballooning our deficit. Our deficit spending is really a concern. It's getting a little out of control. As a new member of Congress, it's certainly concerning to me, especially as we are also lining the pockets of billionaires and taking away these vital lifelines for hardworking Americans.
You've talked about your opposition to the bill. Is there anything that you can get behind as it currently stands?
Absolutely, and I really appreciate you asking that question. There are many provisions in this legislation that I know many of my Democratic colleagues would support. We could support the no tax on tips provisions. I would support ending taxation on Social Security. I would support looking at ending no tax on overtime. These are all provisions that are overwhelmingly supported by the American people. And Republicans, unfortunately, though, are using those provisions as an excuse to jam through these other awful, cruel, terrible provisions in this bill. We know that the U.S. Senate has already taken up no tax on tips. It was passed via unanimous consent. We could take up that legislation in the House today. Instead of fighting over reconciliation, we could have an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote in favor of ending taxation on tips. I'm all for lowering taxes for working families. It was the #1 reason that Americans and people in my district sent me to Washington to lower costs. But unfortunately, we're now almost 200 days into this Congress and there's been no action taken to lower costs. Instead, we're seeing bills like this big, ugly bill pushing forward that for most Americans is going to do the opposite. It's actually going to drive up costs in healthcare, in food supports, in energy, all the while taking away taxes on things like silencers for guns. If we're really concerned about the deficit, that's one provision that is unnecessarily going to drive up our deficit while keeping our communities less safe.
You've mentioned nutrition benefits. During the interview, you are introducing an amendment that is related to SNAP. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, yeah, I was before the Rules Committee just yesterday and introduced an amendment that basically mirrored the work of the U.S. Senate and would offer the same exemption to work requirements and state match that will be provided and afforded to just a few states, to all states in the country, because fair is fair. And if we're going to pass this legislation, we should provide that same delayed implementation to all states. Interestingly enough, when the Senate passed these exemptions, primarily again for Alaska and Hawaii, what we know is that it actually incentivizes states to have a higher error rate. So, it sort of really underlines just how ridiculous this whole bill is and how this whole process has been. So states that have higher error rates will be the states that get exemptions for things like work requirements and state match. It will delay when the states have to do that. So really a perverse reverse incentive. So my amendment that I introduced to rules, which I think should be ruled in order if they're going to advance the bill anyways, with basically an amendment already attached to it that provides those exemptions for a few states, we should apply that to all states. So we'll see what my colleagues on the Rules Committee decide to do there. I'm not holding my breath, but again, I think it underscores the hypocrisy of this bill and the cruelty of this bill.
You'll be starting work on this bill with your colleagues just momentarily in the next 30 minutes or so. What are you hearing about the bill's prospects of the House, in the House?
We know, and I hear from conversations directly with Republican colleagues, I hear it from whispers around the halls of Congress, that Republican members of Congress are deeply concerned about, A, what this bill will do to their districts, but also they're concerned about what this means politically. This bill is toxic, it is underwater. Even a Fox News poll said that this legislation is deeply flawed. The American people do not support it. As they learn more about the legislation, they oppose it even more, and for good reason. And so it's my hope that my Republican colleagues in particular, especially those who've already said that they will be voting against this legislation, don't do what they did last time and folded in the hopes that, or the stated claims that this legislation would get better. It's gotten worse in the Senate. This is really the last stand. And so if Republicans who said they have concerns about this bill for any number of reasons mean it, now is the time to stand strong. I was encouraged to see 2 members of the Rules Committee vote against the rule advancing last night. Hopefully those 2 Republican members stand strong on the rule and the underlying legislation today. Just a few more and we can bring this back to the table. And again, as we were mentioning with the provisions that I do support, there's a real roadmap here where Democrats and Republicans can and should work together. I stand ready to come to the table to really provide that tax relief for hardworking Americans, pass those common sense measures, but doing so in a way that doesn't represent a huge giveaway to big corporations and to billionaires, that doesn't do so in a way that balloons our deficit unnecessarily.
Representative Johnny Olszewski is a Democrat of Maryland and a freshman member of Congress. Congressman, thank you so much for your time this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks.